They say every empire is built on a lie, a single illusion so powerful that entire nations believe it's permanent. For America, that illusion was simple, that the dollar would always be the world's most powerful currency. But what if I told you the dollar's dominance wasn't built on gold, innovation, or democracy, but on a secret deal made in the desert nearly 50 years ago? A deal that turned oil into money, and the United States into the most powerful empire in modern history. That deal, the Petrodollar Pact, is now breaking apart, and when it finally collapses, it could end the world as we know it. In August 1971, the world changed forever. On national television, President Richard Nixon calmly announced that the U.S. would suspend the convertibility of the dollar into gold. It sounded technical, even temporary, but it was in truth the end of the Bretton Woods system that had governed global finance since World War II. Under Bretton Woods, the U.S. dollar was as good as gold. Foreign nations could exchange their dollars for real metal, held in American vaults. It was a system built on trust that America would never abuse its position. But by the late 1960s, that trust was fading. The Vietnam War was bleeding the treasury. Social programs under Lyndon Johnson were expanding faster than taxes could cover. The government printed money to hide its deficits, while gold reserves fell like sand through a sieve. Countries began to notice. France, under President Charles de Gaulle, called the U.S. bluff. He demanded payment in gold, not paper, and sent a battleship across the Atlantic to collect it. His message to the world was clear. The emperor had no clothes. By 1971, America's gold reserves were collapsing. The U.S. had promised to back every dollar with gold, but there was far more paper than metal. If every nation demanded its share, the U.S. would go bankrupt overnight. So Nixon went on television and ended the illusion. With one sentence, he cut the link between the dollar and gold, between promise and reality. The dollar became pure faith, pure paper. The world was stunned. Inflation exploded. The cost of living rose everywhere. For the first time, America's money had no physical anchor, and the global economy trembled. But in the shadows of crisis, a new idea was forming. Nixon and his advisors, led by Henry Kissinger, were desperate to find a replacement for gold. They needed something every nation valued, something every country had to buy, something the U.S. could control. They found it in oil. Oil was the world's true currency. It powered everything: armies, factories, economies, civilizations. Whoever controlled oil controlled the modern world. In 1974, a small group of American officials flew quietly to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. The mission was secret. Their goal was to convince the Saudi royal family to sell their oil exclusively in U.S. dollars. The logic was ruthless and elegant. If oil could only be bought with dollars, every nation on earth would need to hold dollars. That would create permanent, built-in demand for America's currency, no matter how much it printed. In return, Washington offered protection. The U.S. would guard the Saudi kingdom, supply it with weapons, defend it against enemies, and ensure the royal family's survival. The Saudis agreed, and within a few years, every OPEC nation followed their lead. The deal was never made public, never debated in Congress. It was hidden behind diplomatic smiles and vague promises, but its impact was revolutionary. The petrodollar system was born, and with it, America's financial dominance entered a new golden age. Now every country that needed oil also needed dollars. They had no choice. Japan, Germany, Brazil, India, they all began stockpiling American currency. Central banks filled their vaults with U.S. dollars, not because they loved America, but because they couldn't function without it. Demand for the dollar exploded. Washington could now print as much as it wanted. The world absorbed the inflation that should have destroyed the U.S. economy. It was the most brilliant economic sleight of hand in history, replacing gold with oil, stability with dependency. For the next 4 decades, this hidden system turned the U.S. into an unstoppable force. When America needed money for wars or welfare, it simply created dollars. Other countries produced goods, oil and labor. America produced the money that paid for it all. Factories closed across the Midwest, but Wall Street soared. America consumed more than it created, imported more than it exported, and yet lived in endless prosperity. The rest of the world worked to earn dollars, while the U.S. simply printed them. Foreign nations recycled their dollars by buying U.S. debt, financing the very empire that ruled them. The petrodollar became the oxygen of global trade. It seemed eternal, but like every empire, it contained the seeds of its own decay. By the early 2000s, small cracks began to show. Some nations began questioning the system. In 2000, Iraq's Saddam Hussein dared to sell oil in euros instead of dollars. 2 years later, he was gone. In 2009, Libya's Muammar Gaddafi proposed a new gold-backed African dinar. He wanted Africa to trade oil without dollars, without Western banks. 2 years later, Libya was in ruins. Officially, these were wars for democracy. Unofficially, they were warnings. But the 21st century brought a new challenge: China. China's rise changed everything. Its factories powered the world, and its demand for oil soared. Beijing began signing deals with oil producers to pay in yuan, not dollars. Slowly, quietly, the petrodollar's foundations began to tremble. Then came 2008, the global financial crisis. The U.S. banking system imploded, Wall Street gambled away trillions, and the Federal Reserve printed more money than ever before. Around the world, trust in the American financial model began to collapse. Nations started to wonder, why should they hold dollars backed only by debt and war? By the 2000s, Russia and China were trading oil directly in their own currencies. Iran and Venezuela followed. The old world order, with the U.S. at the center, was fading. Then came the earthquake. In 2023, Saudi Arabia, the very nation that started it all, joined the BRICS alliance alongside China, Russia, India, Brazil, and South Africa. For the first time, Riyadh publicly discussed selling oil in Chinese yuan. It was the ultimate betrayal and the clearest sign that the petrodollar era was ending. China responded by creating the Shanghai Petroleum Exchange, where oil can be traded in yuan convertible to gold. That meant nations could now buy energy without touching the dollar at all. At the same time, BRICS countries began designing a new settlement system, a shared currency tied to commodities like oil, metals, and food. Over 40 nations applied to join. Together, they controlled most of the planet's resources. The center of gravity was shifting from Washington to the east. Meanwhile, back home, America was drowning in debt, $35 trillion and counting. The interest payments alone are now larger than the entire defense budget. For decades, this didn't matter. The world's demand for dollars was infinite. But if oil no longer needs to be bought in dollars, that demand collapses. And with it, the illusion of endless wealth disappears. Inflation will no longer be exported abroad. It will stay in American homes. Energy prices will soar. Imports will become luxuries. The middle class, already shrinking, will bear the cost of half a century of easy money. The petrodollar didn't just make America rich. It made it dependent, addicted to cheap energy, cheap labor, and cheap credit. Now the bill is coming due. If you want to understand what's coming next, the collapse of trust, the rise of new alliances, and the birth of a different world, take a moment to subscribe and stay alert, because what's unfolding isn't a conspiracy. It's history repeating itself. Every empire believes its currency will last forever. Rome debased its silver denarius until it was worthless bronze. The Spanish Empire flooded Europe with silver and destroyed its own economy. The British pound ruled the world until 2 world wars buried it under debt. And now it's America's turn. The pattern never fails. It only waits for arrogance. Today, digital currencies are emerging as the next frontier. China's digital yuan is already being used across Asia and Africa. Russia's digital ruble is settling oil contracts. Even Saudi Arabia and the UAE are testing digital payments that bypass the dollar. Meanwhile, Washington debates and delays, trapped by its own success. In the near future, oil might not be priced in dollars at all. It might be priced in data, gold, or digital credits exchanged through blockchain systems that the U.S. doesn't control. Empires don't die by invasion. They die when trust disappears. And trust is vanishing fast. When the U.S. seized Russia's reserves in 2022, it sent a global message. Your money in dollars isn't safe. Central banks reacted immediately. They began buying gold at the fastest rate in half a century. Not because they love gold, but because it's the only asset that doesn't depend on promises. The petrodollar is dying, not because of one war or one decision, but because of decades of arrogance. America believed it could print forever. That trust alone could sustain an empire. But history doesn't reward arrogance. It punishes it. In its place, a new system is emerging. A world of regional powers, local currencies, and resource-backed trade. Oil bought in yuan, food traded in rupees, technology sold in euros. The dollar will still exist, but no longer as the bloodstream of the world. It will be just another currency among many. The question isn't if the petrodollar collapses, it's how fast. And when it does, power will shift not just between nations, but between ordinary people and the institutions that once ruled them. If this story opened your eyes, share it, like, subscribe, and remember, History is not a straight line. It's a cycle. Rise, overreach, and collapse. We are witnessing the end of one cycle and the birth of another. The secret deal that made America rich is unraveling. And as the illusion fades, a new reality emerges. One where money, oil, and power are no longer American. The question now isn't whether the petrodollar will fall, but what will replace it. Because the story of money is the story of empires. And like all empires, this one too has an expiration date.